Sometimes the closest people become the worst enemies. Can they be forgiven? Or were they never really family? Subscribe to the channel if this story touched you. They say that money doesn't change people. It just shows who they really were. I didn't believe that until my mother died. Hello. I hope you find this story interesting. Your feedback, suggestions, and subscriptions are always welcome. The Henry Lawrence stood by the phone, clutching the receiver. His heart was beating faster than usual. She died this morning. The voice on the other end of the line said dryly. But although Henry had been preparing for this moment, the news hit him like a fist to the stomach. His mother, Elizabeth Lawrence, was a strong woman. She had survived the war, the death of her husband, and raised 3 sons. And now she was gone, leaving them only memories, and a legacy that would change everything. Henry went up to the attic, where there were old boxes. His childhood was this house, this old creaking parquet, these smells of wood and dust. He took out a yellowed photograph from a box. In it, he is a boy holding his brother Robert's hand, and Frank, the youngest, is sitting on his mother's lap. Brothers. Can they still be called that? Henry arrived at his parents' house the day after the funeral. He just wanted to pick up his things, but they were already there. Robert was smoking in the yard, and Frank was standing by the window with his arms crossed. Oh, look who's back, Robert said with a sly smile. That's enough, Henry sighed. I'm not here for that. Frank was silent, but his gaze was heavy. They all knew why they were here. The air, when the lawyer opened the documents, the air in the room became heavy. According to your mother's will, the house and land are to be transferred to Henry Lawrence. Silence. Henry felt his heart pounding in his chest. What, Anna? Frank broke the silence. Are you kidding? Robert threw his cigarette on the floor. I'm just reading the documents. The lawyer remained calm. Henry looked at his brothers. There was no sadness or regret in their eyes. Only indignation and something darker. He knew they wouldn't let it go. But he hadn't realized how far they were willing to go. When you think you know your family, just wait until you have to divide the inheritance. And that's when you'll see their true faces. The room was quiet, but it was not peaceful, it was suffocating. Henry looked at his brothers. Their eyes were like lightning. Say it again, Robert said, gritting his teeth. The lawyer sighed and read the document again. According to your mother's will, the house and land are to be owned by Henry Lawrence. Frank clenched his fists. There must be some mistake. It's not a mistake, the lawyer replied calmly. Your mother made that decision herself. Robert snorted. You were always her favorite, weren't you, Henry? Henry didn't answer. She would never do that. Frank raised his voice. Then Henry closed his eyes. He had seen this moment coming. She did what she thought was right. Robert pounded his fist on the table. All right, you're taking our house. Ours. Henry looked him straight in the eye. Where were you when she was sick? Where were you when she needed help? Frank went pale. I was working. Working. I was living here. I took care of her. I paid for everything. Robert laughed. Oh, I see. Upanoba, you think you deserve this house. I don't think anything. It was his mother's decision. Frank sat down in his chair, clutching his head. It's not right. Robert slowly walked over to Henry. You're just going to throw us out on the street. No one forbids you to come here. But the house is yours. Yes, Robert laughed again. Well, Henry, congratulations. You're officially the biggest bastard in this family. Henry knew his brothers would never forgive him. But he hadn't realized how far they would go to get back what they thought was theirs. There are some dinners that make you feel better about yourself. And then there are those that make you want to change all the locks in your house. This dinner was the second type. Henry was sitting at a large oak table that he had associated with family celebrations since childhood. The whole family used to gather at this table. They laughed, remembered the past, and argued about trifles. Now there were only 3 people at the table, him, Robert, and Frank. And the air was heavy like before a storm. Atha, well, master of the house. Robert began, pouring himself some wine. Do you feel like a king? Henry put down the knife. That's enough. Frank looked at him defiantly. You took our house and still want us to smile. I didn't take anything. It was my mother's decision. Robert leaned forward. Didn't you think she might have been out of her mind? Henry tensed. Are you implying that I was manipulating her? Oh, Robert smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Frank put down his fork. Listen, we're not joking. We think you have to be fair. And what does that mean? We'll just split the inheritance. We'll sell the house and split the money. Henry shook his head. That wasn't what his mother wanted. Robert leaned back in his chair. What if we don't ask? Henry met his gaze. Or is that a threat? Robert laughed. Oh, no, not at all. We're brothers. Frank smiled, but there was nothing warm in his eyes. Just think about it. Henry knew they wouldn't let this go. This dinner was just the beginning. Trust is a thin thread. A can last for years, but if you push hard enough, it will break. I didn't realize that my trust had already been broken a long time ago. After that dinner, Henry could not find a place to go. But he knew that his brothers would not accept it, but he did not expect them to act so quickly. The next morning he received a phone call. Mr. Lawrence, it's Bennett from the law firm. I have some information about your will. Henry frowned. What's going on? Your brothers came to see us yesterday. They requested to see the will. Henry clutched the phone in his hand. What? They claim your mother was unfit to make decisions when she signed the documents. My head throbbed. They want to prove she was incapacitated. That's right. If the court upholds their claim, the will could be invalidated. Henry felt anger building in his chest. He immediately called Robert. What are you up to? But his brother's voice was calm, even satisfied. We are just seeking justice. You're trying to make our mother crazy just to get the house. This is business, Henry. You don't have to be so emotional about it. Henry clenched his fists. Though his mother had been her right mind until the last day. Maybe she was. But the court might decide otherwise. Henry hung up the phone. His fingers were trembling. What if the brothers found false witnesses? What if the court believed them? He opened a cabinet and pulled out an old folder with his mother's medical records. Her doctor had confirmed that she was completely sane. But would that be enough? The Henry knew one thing: the game had just moved to another level. His brothers were ready to go all the way. Sometimes you think the worst is over, but then you open the door and see that it's really just beginning. Henry woke up at 6 in the morning with a strange premonition. Something was not right. He went down to the kitchen and made himself some coffee, but even the bitterness of it didn't help him get rid of the heavy feeling in his chest. Yesterday he had found his mother's documents that proved her sanity at the time of her will. This could protect his rights to the house. But he had forgotten the most important thing. And with growing anxiety, Henry opened his laptop and logged into his bank account. And his heart stopped for a moment. The balance $0. His savings, which he had been saving for years, were gone. He wiped his eyes several times. Was it a mistake? Maybe the bank had made a mistake. But when he opened his statements, everything became clear. The money had been withdrawn last week. Small amounts, gradually, so that no one would notice right away. His account had been cleaned out to the last penny. Henry leaned back in his chair. No. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this on purpose, and he knew who. He grabbed his phone and dialed Robert's number. Henry, brother, Hannah. His brother's voice sounded too cheerful. You stole my money, Robert laughed. Are you paranoid? Don't pretend. You took everything from my account. Have you forgotten that my mother gave me power of attorney? Henry felt his chest tighten with anger. She canceled it 5 years ago. Well, apparently not quite. Henry shook with anger. Or why would she do that? Robert exhaled. Because we need the money, and you left us no choice. It's not your money. Well, it is now. Henry slowly lowered the phone. The fight had just begun. Some secrets must remain buried, but sometimes they come to the surface on their own, and then it's too late to change anything. Henry could not calm down. The brothers weren't just trying to take his house away from him, they had already done it. They had stolen all his money, deprived him of his financial security, and jeopardized his future. He felt betrayed. But at the same time, he knew something was wrong. Why were they clinging to this house so desperately? He decided to look for answers. There were dusty boxes in the attic. They contained his mother's entire life-ago bills, photos, letters. He rummaged them for almost 2 hours until he found a strange document. An old notarized deed. The house was registered to someone else. Henry stopped. Raymond Lawrence. Not his father, not his grandfather. A stranger. His mother didn't own this house. It belonged to someone else. But why would she hide it? Henry looked through more documents, and then he came across the letters. Raymond Lawrence wrote them to his mother. You can't hide the truth forever. One day they will find out. The house belongs to me, and you know it. Henry felt his hands shake. Who was Raymond Lawrence? And why was his mother so afraid the truth would be found out? It's never a good sign when you get calls in the middle of the night, especially if it's someone who doesn't want to give their name. Henry was sitting in his house looking at an old notarized deed. Raymond Lawrence. This name haunted him. Who was he? Why did his mother hide the fact that the house belonged to someone else? What if the brothers had known about it from the beginning? The phone rang sharply and loudly. Henry looked at his watch. It was 3 in the morning. The number was unknown. He pressed the answer button. Hello? There was silence for a few seconds, and then a low male voice, You're digging in the wrong place, Henry. He felt a chill run down his spine. Who is this? Forget about the house. You're mistaken if you think It's not a request. It's a beep. Henry sat down on the bed. His fingers trembled. Was that Robert? Was it Frank? Or was it someone else? He looked again at the name Raymond Lawrence. If he wanted answers, he needed to find out who this man was, and why someone didn't want him to do it. If you are openly threatened, then you are close to the truth. But the truth is a dangerous thing. It can destroy not only life, but also the very idea of reality. Henry could not sit idly by. After the nighttime phone call, it became clear that someone really didn't want him to know about the past of this house. But now he couldn't stop. The next morning he gathered all the documents and went to Robert's house. The brothers were sitting in the living room as if they were waiting for him. Is something wrong, Henry? Robert asked sarcastically. Henry put a yellowed notarized deed on the table. Does this name look familiar to you? Robert took a quick glance at the paper, and his face changed for a moment. He had never heard of it. Frank silently took the document and began to read. You're lying, Henry said coldly. Robert leaned back on the couch. And so what? You think you've uncovered some secret. Henry clenched his fists. Why didn't you tell me that my mother wasn't the rightful owner of the house? Frank glanced at Robert. I told you he would find out. Robert sighed. Okay, you want the truth. Here it is. He took a bottle of whiskey, poured it into his glass, and drank it in one gulp. Raymond Lawrence was our real father. Henry froze. Oh, what? Our father is a lie that Mom made up. She left Raymond when you were little and signed the house over to herself? But legally it never belonged to her. Henry felt his hands shake. Why didn't you say anything? Robert smiled. Because we wanted this house. To an end, you were standing in our way. Henry realized that he had never really known his family, and now he wasn't even sure it was his family. Home is not just walls. It's memories, roots, connections that seem unbreakable. But what if you realize you've been living a lie? What if your home was never yours? Henry stood in front of an empty house. The doors were open, and the wind was blowing through the empty rooms. Everything looked the same as when he was a child, but at the same time it was foreign. He no longer knew what this place meant to him. The brothers took everything. They forged documents and proved in court that the house belonged to Raymond Lawrence. The lawyer said that Henry had no legal rights to this property. Now he had nothing, no house, no money, no family. He walked slowly through the rooms. Though to kiss is where the Christmas tree used to stand at Christmas. This is where his mother used to sit by the fireplace and brush his hair when he was little. Hugh and Tiss is where his brothers used to play, not knowing that they would one day betray each other. Henry went to the mirror in the hallway. Could they have been different? Could this story have ended differently? He didn't know. But he did know one thing: some houses are better left empty. Just like some families. Life is not only what you gain, but also what you lose. Is it worth holding on to the past when it is poisoned? Or is it better to just walk away and never look back? If this story made you think, subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories ahead that may be closer than you think.